Hey everybody, welcome to Weekly Dose Wednesday. And for those of you that may be listening to this on the Hustle with Heart podcast, welcome to another episode. I am excited because tonight I am going to come to you from my upcoming book, Pursuing Success God's Way, a practical guide to hustle with heart. If you're watching this on YouTube or live in the Success God's Way community, this is the current view of the cover, but it's actually going to change a little bit. And I'm really excited to see the new design that is coming. But tonight, what I want to dig into is something I heard the other day on an Elevation Church podcast. And it was a recent episode about success. But what jumped out at me was this idea. I'm pulling up my notes if you see me looking away on YouTube or on the live. But the idea is yield your fruit. So our foundational verse, and I talked about this a little bit the other day on the Daily Dose, but for this episode, what I talked about was Psalm 1, verses 2 and 3. So here is what this says. I'm actually going to take you from Psalm 1, verse 1, so that you have the whole picture of what David is sharing in the psalm. And it is really about adhering and delighting in the Lord and what happens when we do that. So here's what this says. This is the English Standard Version. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffers, but his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. He is like a tree planted by streams of water that yields its fruit in its season, and its leaf does not wither. In all he does, he prospers. So in my book, I have 3 sections. So section 1 is really about my story, my wake-up call. It's about God's definition of success and what that means to him for us to pursue success his way. And then the very first and foremost thing that needs to happen in pursuing success God's way, which is putting him first. But part 2 is really where we dig into how do you hustle with heart. So the first chapter in part 2 are the principles for your hustle with heart journey. And this principle, yield your fruit, is principle number 1. Why? Because God made us each individually unique as his workmanship. He knows every hair on my head. He knows every hair on your head. He made each of us for a very specific purpose, and he made each of us wonderfully and fearfully. But what happens sometimes in life and in business is that we start to look around and see what other people have. And the story that I relate here in this chapter is really about how I was seeing people being recognized on a stage, and I thought, God, I want that stage. And what I felt the Holy Spirit reveal within me was, that's not your stage. And so what came up in this Elevation Church podcast is that this verse very specifically says he is like a tree planted by streams of water. So his nourishment comes from the living water, Christ, and yields its fruit. Its fruit. An apple tree can only yield apples, and an orange tree can only yield oranges. But as humans, we spend a lot of time knowing that we're an apple tree, but then looking over at the orange tree and going, gosh, I wish I could produce oranges. Or I'm a Granny Smith apple tree, and I'm looking over at the Honeycrisp apple tree saying, I want to make Honeycrisp apples. The point is, we have to be who God called us to be. And each of us has very unique spiritual gifts. We have a very unique purpose that he made us for, because he made us uniquely, fearfully and wonderfully made. So when Pastor Stephen Furtick was talking about yielding your fruit, what is the fruit that God's given you to yield? And how has he very specifically placed you in the business that you're in to yield your fruit? And sometimes along this journey, God will redirect us by pruning, right? Because a gardener prunes. It takes away the dead branches and prunes the branches so they will be more fruitful. That's from John 15, which you all know if you've listened to me for any length of time. John 15:4 is the foundational verse for Hustle with Heart. So God is going to prune us because he wants us to be more fruitful, and he's going to take away the things that are not fruitful. But he still calls us to yield our fruit only. I can't yield your fruit. You can't yield my fruit. I can't yield the fruit of the leaders that I see on the stage, and they can't yield my fruit when they see me. Now, does that mean that in our business, particularly for those of us who may be in network marketing or social marketing, that we don't do the work and we don't follow the system? Absolutely. But what we cannot prescribe is that our fruit will look like someone else's fruit who's done the same work. Is there a logical pattern of promotion? Absolutely. But your journey is going to look very different than someone else's. Even if side by side you're doing exactly the same work at exactly the same pace, your journeys will look different. Your teams will look different. Your standing in that title when you promote looks different than the way someone else's does. We are all to yield our fruit. So I want to share with you a portion of this chapter about yielding your own fruit as principle 1. And this is what it says. For my first 5 years in my social marketing business, and I say that was my life BC or before Christ, I lived by the ever popular mantra, fake it till you make it. When fear gripped me, I would try to assume the mantle of a very successful person in posture and confidence and fake my way through it. The problem is, while I had passion for what I was doing, sometimes that came across in a way that people couldn't relate to. And I know I can sense when someone is faking it till they make it, and people can see through that, right? People can see through that. So before we go down the path of authenticity, what I want you to know about yielding your own fruit is that if you're trying to be a different fruit, if you're trying to produce a different fruit, after a while, you completely get wrapped up in someone else's approach to their business and their life and their results, and you begin to measure your output. You begin to measure your harvest with their harvest, but they produce different fruit than you do, right? So not only does this leave you feeling sort of less than, it also sets you up for imposter syndrome. And maybe you've heard the word imposter syndrome. I want to tell you what the Harvard Business Review defined the imposter syndrome in 2008. And this is what it said: a collection of feelings of inadequacy that persist despite evident success. Imposters suffer from chronic self-doubt and a sense of intellectual fraudulence that override any feelings of success or external proof of their competence. And this is from Overcoming Imposter Syndrome by Gil Corkindale, which was published in May 2008 in the Harvard Business Review. So the point is, we stand around comparing our harvest to someone else's harvest. We start to feel less than. We start to feel like an imposter. Tell me if you can relate to this. I've been doing this business for so long, and I don't have the same success as this person who went to this level faster than me. So I must be an imposter. I must be saying this business works, but it really doesn't. Or I must be saying that you can have the success, but maybe you can't. Or maybe that's only reserved for those people. That's imposter syndrome, you guys. And so all of this starts to happen, and it leaves us wondering who we are and what God says about us, right? But we have to come back to detaching ourselves from what the harvest needs to look like and what somebody else is producing. And we have to detach our identity from what we're producing and put our identity solely in Christ, because he defines who we are. We were made in his image. He defines what fruit is mine to produce and what fruit is yours to produce. But you know what he doesn't do? He never looks at us and sees us as a failure when we're not producing fruit at the pace we want. We're not producing big enough fruit. We're not producing perfectly colored fruit. No, the Lord does not judge us in that way. Because the other thing that this verse says in Psalm 1 is that it yields its fruit in its season. So I don't know about you, but on my clean eating journey, and I'm talking about that because I am your Hustle with Heart and health coach, I have learned to eat fruits and vegetables in their season. But you see, it's really tricky because the grocery stores would want you to think that you can get certain fruits and vegetables all year round. And you may notice that certain fruits and vegetables are more expensive in certain seasons because they're not in their season. And we as humans have done a great job of importing those fruits from other places where it might be in season, or manipulating the seed and the harvest so that that fruit or vegetable can be produced in that season. But the bottom line is this: our fruit is produced in the season it's supposed to be produced in. So you know what that means? Where you are right now is exactly where God has placed you to thrive and to bloom. I know that this idea of bloom where you are planted is sort of cliche, but it's true. And God has a season for you to produce your fruit. And your season for your fruit is different than my season for my fruit. So as entrepreneurs, it's really important that we stop looking side to side and seeing where someone else is in their season for two reasons. Number one, that's not our season. That's their season. Number two, we have no idea what drought, what overgrowth, what pruning back. We have no idea what they've been through for God to put them in that season that they're in. So yielding our own fruit happens only when we are willing to surrender our business to the Lord and know that He gave us our fruit, and we will yield our fruit in our season that He determines. The other excerpt that I want to give you from the book is that one of the things that we go through on this journey is this, it really is the sanctification process as we grow in our relationship with Christ. But in our business, as we start to unravel that identity and we start to turn our identity to the Lord, this is not a one and done thing. It happens over time. It's about the progress that happens, right? So learning to be who God made us to be isn't a checklist that we glide through with our big blue pen, checking the boxes and never revisiting again. God's molding of us, His sanctification, takes time. He chisels away layers of sin. He breaks down the strongholds that have been long ingrained in us: pride, idolatry, ego, etc. And He does that so that it makes room for the impurities to bubble out, right? And to become and to be able to produce the fruit that He's given us. So I want you to think of maybe a tree or a flower bush. I was never really good at growing roses. I mean, I love roses, but you know, if you don't really effectively prune that rose bush, it gets thorny and it has sort of these offshoots, which inhibits the roses from blooming the way that they should. And the point is, in yielding our fruit, that God wants to prune all of that away for us so that when our season comes, we are fully able to produce the fruit that He has created for us to produce. So yielding that fruit takes time. It takes progress. It takes pruning. And that's really hard for those of us who are a get it done, check the box, and be done with it kind of person. That is me. Like, I don't know about you, but when I make a checklist, I don't just check off what's on the list. If I do something that's not on the list, I put it on the list and I check it off, right? We can't do that with God's growth of us and the fruit that he's intended for us. And that's what we mean by yielding your fruit. Be you. Be who God called you to be. Put yourself in your business. Speak the language of your business from your perspective. Tell the story of your business in your words. I think sometimes we get so stuck in thinking it has to be said the perfect way and the message has to be perfectly wrapped up for someone to hear it. But you guys, when we are yielding our fruit that he gave us, we are talking about our businesses, our products or services from who we are in sincerity of who he made us to be. And those words might not sound like someone else's. So don't be afraid to speak your language about your business, your products or service, because people want to hear from you. God has already lined up for you the people that you're meant to serve. God has already put this business as a vehicle in your life to produce the fruit that he's made you to produce. So the best thing that you can do is be the best steward of that and show up surrendered. Show up with the faith to know that God is going to do what God's going to do. And for the trust to step out and be obedient to what he's called you to do without trying to yield someone else's fruit, without trying to sound like someone else, without trying to use someone else's words. And I know it's naive, not naive, but I know it's cliche to think like God only made one you. But you know what? He only made one you and he only made one me. And he gave you fruit and he gave me fruit. So I want to encourage you to produce and yield your fruit. I really hope that this brought value to you. It is going to be in the book. It's part of that part 2 of the book, the principles of your Hustle with Heart journey. By the way, if you have not responded that you want to be part of my book team, please do. I'm working with someone who's building my book website. I'm going to be getting information out to all of those who've decided to be on my book team. And being on my book team may mean that you just post quotes from my book. It may mean that you get an advanced copy of the book and you read it and you're ready and poised to place that pre-order and get on Amazon on that first day and write a review. But if you haven't already responded that you'd like to be part of my book team, I'd love to have you. And then please, please, please get on over to erinharrigan.com. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss a podcast, a blog, a book update, or whatever. I know that this topic, I've had so many people tell me how needed this topic is of pursuing success God's way. And I am just humbled that I get to be his messenger, that I get to share my story and that it impacts others. And I would love to hear how it's impacted you. So get down below. If you're in our Success God's Way community watching live or watching the recording, please leave your comments. Please get on over and subscribe to the podcast. Leave me 5 stars on iTunes. Leave some comments there. And as always, if you need a coach and an ally to walk beside you along this journey, I would love to talk to you about Hustle with Heart coaching. And if being in your best mental focus, getting enough rest, feeling good, feeling like you're ready and energized to do what God's called you to do is important to you, let's chat about clean eating with Arbonne 30 as well. This is Erin Harrigan, your Hustle with Heart and health coach. Thank you for tuning in to our Wednesday weekly dose. And I will see you guys tomorrow morning on my news feed for the Daily Dose. Have a great night.